Our next speaker, as you saw, is Mr. Mike French. Mike is the Vice President for Space Systems at the Aerospace Industries Association. Mike's experience in space industry ranges from advising senior government leaders on space policy to developing market forecasts and assessments for industry executives, to analyzing major space investments for companies and banks. So let's hear what Mike has to say. Mike French. Boom.
Sir. Hi, good morning, everybody. First off, thank you, SGAC, for having me. Really excited to be here this morning. So what am I going to talk about? I want to talk about deep space networking, not talking to satellites in deep space, but thinking about your first job in the space business or your next job in the space business and the process of getting there. And so before I do that, thank you for the great introduction. So just, real quickly, what is my background? What do I do? So the Aerospace Industries Association is a trade association that represents about 300 companies in the aerospace and defense industry. And my job is to lead the space policy aspects of that association. So help those member companies come up with positions and advocate for those positions on the Hill, with Congress, with NASA and the executive branch, as well as with the public in general. My background includes working at NASA as both the chief of staff and deputy chief of staff. Is working as a consultant for a commercial space consulting firm, and well before that, many jobs before that, was an aerospace lawyer. So go lawyers! And so as you can see, I have a lot of experience in finding jobs, less experience in keeping them, but I think that's more important for networking. So as I talk about today, I want to talk about three. I'm going to have three. It's going to be a choose your own adventure. So I'm going to have three characters we're going to talk about. So our first friend that I meet a lot says, I want to do anything in space. I'll do anything. That's our first character. Our second character is, I want to do space policy. That's our second character. And our third character says, I want to be assistant to the assistant principal deputy assistant secretary for operations. That's a real job, by the way, at the Department of Energy. So those are our three characters. So let's start with our first character. Our first character will do anything. And so you'd think that our first character here actually has the best chance of landing a job, right? I mean, they'll do anything. Sounds easy, right? Actually, that's the hardest for me as someone coming to meet with me. That's the hardest person for me to talk to or to help. Very dated reference, but in the words of Jerry Maguire, help me help you, right? So what do I mean by that? So because when you tell me you can do anything, I need a little bit of help to sort of think about my own portfolio of both people and jobs and experience and provide that insight to you. But it's really hard if you present me the universe. And so what do you do? So what's the next step to do when you find yourself in the I'll do anything bucket? So two things that I'd say. The first is think a little bit about who you are, right? What's your experience to date? What have you studied? Where have you worked? What are the things that really interest you? And that can be really helpful, right? If you've spent 6 years working on an engineering degree, you may not want to be an engineer, but it's probably worth spending a little time to learn a bit about what that would be, right? And what kind of job that would be. And that may help frame a few discussions around what is that job set? What could that look like? Another really good tool is to look around our space community, look at the different brochures of panelists talking this week at Satellite or other conferences, and say, you know what, that's a really cool job, right? How do I become Clay Morey? Everyone wants to be Clay Morey. And so, right, and so a really good thing, and what's interesting is you might think, why on earth will Clay Morey want to talk to me? I'm about to send you a lot of people, Clay. Right? Well, I'll tell you why. Because a lot of us in every industry, especially here in DC, we got our jobs and our careers have been because other people in those senior jobs, when we were less experienced, less senior, they were incredibly generous with their time and their advice. And for a lot of us, we spend a good amount of our time paying that back, understanding how important that is for the entire ecosystem in our industry to do that. And so I'd advise, right, I wouldn't go call every panelist here at Satellite, but you find a few people that seem to have an interesting career and see if they'd be willing to talk. And like I said, you'd be surprised about how many people will spend some time to do that. And the question there is not, how do I get your job? But the question there is, tell me about your path, right? How'd you end up in this interesting job? And why that's helpful is you'll start hearing about some of the real jobs, actual jobs they had, right? You'll start hearing about some of the trades they made in their own careers and their own lives to end up in that job they have. And that background, that's very useful in getting from the I'll do anything to my next friend. So let's go to our next friend here. So our next friend is, I want to do space policy, right? So sounds kind of specific, right? Space policy. Actually, this person is even maybe a little harder for me because I do space policy than maybe helping the I'll do anything person. And I'll tell you why, because when you think about space policy, there's this sort of vision of, you've got this job and you're deciding grand questions and shaping, the future by your one act. That's really hard to find, right? That it's hard. It's usually the thousands of people interacting that at the end of the day make anything like this happen. And so if you're thinking about, I want to do space policy, a couple questions for you to think about. So the first one is, think about how the people that are going to pay me for my great space policy work, how do those people make money, right? It's kind of simple, right? So they can sell things, they can do services, they could be consultants, they could be funded by the taxpayer, government job, right? I mean, they could be funded by a benevolent visionary, right? There's all these different types of funding streams that can be important to think about when you're thinking about what a policy job is. Because, for example, if you're doing a policy-oriented job in a company, right, your work is going to be about analysis, either regulatory or market analysis, to at the end of the day help that company either expand to new markets or sell more products. If you're doing something for the taxpayer, right, your job is going to be, for example, on the Hill, where you're helping write bills or gather information for your member or your committee. Or if it's in the executive branch, you're going to be helping build budgets, advocate for those budgets, share information with other stakeholders, share information with the public. And so thinking about who's the ultimate, who am I working for, actually can help you define what that actual job is. Now, that doesn't mean this is not an internet search, right? You got to talk to a lot of humans when you're doing this. And so there's two people I want to introduce you to when you're at this stage, when you're at the I want to do space policy stage or something similar. And those two people are the Sherpa and the closer. These are key people in your search. So the Sherpa, who's the Sherpa? The Sherpa is that person who's willing to have some experience and probably on a path that you'd like to see yourself in. And for whatever reason, you've developed a relationship with them where they're going to be willing to spend some time with you to be almost neutral guide to you, right? It's someone you can help talk about sort of without sort of fear that it's hurting your choices, about the things that you like and don't like, and they can help shape who you should talk to next. It's also someone you could go back to and get further advice to after you learn more. So it's really important to find those Sherpas. And, or mentors, you can call them, what you will. And so I personally have several of these folks. And if you have one, if you've got a couple, I just recommend you just respect and hold on to those because they'll be valuable for your entire career. The other person, let's talk about the closer. So who's the closer? The closer is that person who maybe you have a strong reputation with them for some reason. Maybe it's a professor, maybe it's someone you worked with, but it's not somebody you could probably, you're not going to be able to have coffee with them every week, right? Either they're busy or you're not, whatever the relationship is. But it's important to keep that person in mind because they may be that person when you now have realized the job you want, the closer is the person you're going to call to help push you over into the job, right? So it's kind of important to think about these different people, right? Where are they? How are you interacting with them? Because you may not want to use your closer as your shepherd, right? It just may not work out at the end of the day that you're maximizing your connections. And so in between the shepherd and the closer, there's all kinds of people in between, right? There's not just two people here. And you'll have a lot of informational interviews and other interviews to learn more about the discipline. And so when you do that, two things I want you to keep in mind. The first is, I've done this so many times, right? So I go in, I have an informational interview, I want to learn all about this job. And I walk out of there and I was like, wow, I know so much about being the principal deputy assistant secretary for operations at the Department of Energy. And then I think, well, what's next, right? So that was interesting, but actually, am I any better? I know something, but I'm no closer. And so something that was, told to me, and I'll pass on to you, is always at the end, before you walk out of that informational interview, ask for someone else you should talk to, right? Pretty simple. Who else should I talk to? Do you have any advice on someone else I should talk to? Right. And just like I said before, people can be very generous to say, oh, you know what? You got to meet my friend Tom. Tom's got a similar background to you. You should really hear what he's doing over here, right? So I would always, keep that in mind. I would keep the list short though, right? Let's not overextend the generosity. The second thing I'd say is the bothering, right? So what do I mean by that, right? So I tell people when I meet with them, I said, look, I'm going to connect you with someone, but if you don't hear from me in a week, bother me. I know that's awkward. Just bother me, though. It's not because I forgot. I may be just busy, but please feel free to bother me. And so it might be worth, and it depends on who you're talking to, right? Just, sort of saying, hey, is it okay if I follow up with you in a week on some of these things or something like that? Now, if you want to text me every hour, probably not going to work out as well, right? But just think that in mind, right? Just because someone doesn't respond to you in a week or 10 days, it doesn't mean that they don't want to help. It just may be they're overcome by a lot of stuff in their day job, but they still may want to help. So just something to keep in mind, thinking about that balance. All right. So we talked about the Sherpa, we talked about the closer, we talked about some of these other folks. And so finally, why don't we talk about our friend here who wants to be the assistant to the assistant principal deputy assistant secretary of energy. And so that person's the easiest, right? That's the easiest person. You come to me with that, oh, I love it. Because either I know who that person is, or it's a real human being, right? We can find that person. And so I say it's, half as a joke, but really, with seriousness, because to the extent you can identify sort of real jobs with real humans, your network can really respond well to helping you either get to meet that exact person or to get you to meet people who either work with that person or work in that office and really give you a lay of the land, right? Because at the end of the day, no matter how great you are as a candidate and how great this job would be for you, if there's no job there, right, it's a limiting factor. And so, I say that as a way of just thinking about your search. At the end of the day, there's going to be a particular job at a particular place that you're probably going after. And so, with that, I'll say a big footnote, which is if you have the chance for an internship, I always take them, right? Internship, fellowship, something would get you actually working in a place where you may want to work. And while you're there, take advantage of that. But the more the tricks and details about that, I'll save for next year. So thank you very much for your time.